Hello there, listeners. It's Susie New here from the Australian Society of Anaesthetists, otherwise known as the ASA, and welcome to our podcast. It's called Australian Anaesthesia. This is episode 8 of a little series that we have called Talking Money, where we do more than talk money. We discuss the professional, economic and business aspects of running an anaesthetic practice in Australia. We understand you went to med school to learn how to become a doctor, and that learning how to run a business may have been the last thing on your mind. So we want to share with you this information so that you can focus on the important task of caring for your patients and knowing that the business aspects are being conducted in a way that is safe and, in this episode, compliant with Medicare. So, do you ever use item number 17615? That's the Medicare Benefits Schedule number, or MBS item number, for a pre-anaesthetic consult that lasts longer than 15 minutes. Well, in this podcast, I'm going to go through 3 things. The first thing is that I'm going to go through the definition of 17615 and basically outline when you can and can't use it for anaesthesia consultations. Next, I'm going to explain the concept of double dipping and how you can't do that if you want to remain compliant with Medicare. And then finally, I'm going to suggest some tips for documentation that will hopefully help show that you are not double dipping if ever the need should arise. Before I go into details, I want to remind you that just because you have billed Medicare and received reimbursement on behalf of a patient, that it does not automatically mean that Medicare thinks that you were compliant. That is a different branch of Medicare and one that we at the ASA meet with regularly. That branch is called the Medicare Compliance Branch, and they may actually contact you years after they suspect a breach has occurred. And that's because the vast majority of Medicare claims are processed automatically and are not reviewed. So it's really up to you as the individual anaesthetist to ensure that all your claims are completely compliant with the rules of Medicare. And that's why we at the ASA develop these resources to make sure that you remain compliant, because you, at the end of the day, will be responsible for any incorrect claims. I also want to send a huge acknowledgement to Dr. Michael Lumsden-Steele, Chair of the ASA's Economic Advisory Committee, as well as the rest of the committee, particularly Dr. Andrew Mulcahy and the policy team at the Australian Society of Anaesthetists for developing this podcast with me. They truly are the experts in this area. And finally, for some of you listening out there, the full version of this episode is on the ASA website, and you do need to be a member of the ASA to access it. I will, of course, put a link to the podcast in the show notes so that you don't have to go searching for it. If you are interested in finding out more about joining the ASA so that you can access this podcast and many other resources, then also please look for a link in the show notes on how to join. Otherwise, members will be going through MBS item 17615 and when to use it and how to be clear that you're not double dipping. I'll see you again on the member website. Otherwise, in the meantime, I hope you're staying safe and well out there. You've been listening to an episode of the Australian Anaesthesia podcast, which can be found on all the major podcast hosting platforms as well as YouTube. This podcast is produced by the Australian Society of Anaesthetists and hosted by me, Dr. Susie New, with music created by Dr. Mark Sus. The Australian Society of Anaesthetists was formed in 1934, and our vision is for every anaesthetist in Australia to be at their best, providing the highest quality anaesthesia and perioperative care through excellent technical and non-technical skills. We also hope this means that you are functioning at your best when you are away from work. In this podcast, we have conversations that seek to inform, challenge and inspire so that you keep performing at your best. Members of the ASA can access full versions of all the episodes by logging into the ASA website, which is asa.asa.org.au. If you are listening on your favourite podcast app, then feel free to follow or subscribe so that you can receive the latest episodes as we do publish regularly. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to email us on asa@asa.org.au. We hope you enjoyed listening.